Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. It's James, your host. This episode is particularly special to me because I have a friend of mine coming from the other side of the world, all the way down in Australia. So I hope you enjoy our guest today. It is Martin Silva. Martin, welcome to Carnivorist Chats, my friend.
Thanks for having me on, James. Really appreciate it. Been watching some of your stuff, man, and it's an honor to be on the show.
Thanks for taking the time out, Martin. Again, really appreciate it. For those listeners that don't know you, you also have your own podcast called Optimize Your Body. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. And just so they know, I'm assuming most of your audience is American, right? In America?
Yeah, worldwide, pretty much. We do have a few Oz listeners as well. I have a few UK listeners, and yeah, a lot of Americans as well.
Nice, yeah. So it's spelled optimize with an S-E on the end, just so they know, because it's normally Z-E the American way. But yeah, Optimize Your Body podcast.
Fantastic. Martin, you've also been a transformation coach for over 15 years. Is that correct? Or is it more now these days you've switched your style of coaching, or have you always been sort of a body transformation coach throughout your coaching tenure?
Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. So I started off as a personal trainer when I was 20 years old. I'm now 36. And over the last 4 years, I transitioned into, well, you could change my title to transformation coach because essentially over the last 4 years, I switched what I was doing to helping people online. So I'm reaching more people. You know, I've got clients in America, probably about 30% of my clients actually in America, Australia and the UK. And now I help people with the stuff outside of the gym as well. And actually implementing things that is going to help them transform the way they live. And as a result of that, not just transform their body and level up their behaviors and become the best version of themselves, but be able to get sustainable results, right? Which, as you know, James, is one thing getting in shape, but it's another thing being self-sustaining, right?
Absolutely, Martin. That is the key, is lasting change, not just change for change's sake, but change and habits that will grow with you as you grow. So Martin, I really want to dig into this because it's a fascinating story that you have. And in preparing for today's episode, I listened to a number of podcasts that you've done, and you're an excellent speaker, by the way, and really motivational speaker. So no wonder if you've got a podcast, and I encourage folks, and I'll put the links in the show notes today to find your podcast. But please tell us how you got into this fitness journey. I understand you started off at a very young age, well, relatively young age, around 16. Is that correct?
That's correct, man. Yeah.
So what happened to get you into the fitness world and the bodybuilding journey? Was there a bug that bit you? Was it just simply to look good naked, as a lot of people talk about?
That was definitely part of it. I can't lie. So yeah, with me, I actually first lifted weights. For example, I just fell in love with lifting weights because I started lifting weights at the right age. And just to track back a bit, I've always played sports. So I've always been really athletic. And where I'm from Wales in the UK, just for the audience. A little bit of a backstory. I'm from Wales in the UK. So you've got Wales, England, Scotland, and the UK. I have to explain this to people. Some people think, Wales, I'm not really sure what that is. It's kind of like not on the radar for most people, but it's probably about 3 hours away from London. London's in England. I'm from Wales. I'm from the capital of Wales, Cardiff. And it's almost like Wales, England, and Scotland are separate countries. So a little bit of geography there, separate countries within the UK. But anyway, I'm from Wales. I moved to Australia, Sydney, around about 6.5 years ago. So I'm not actually Australian. I'm from Wales. Just wanted to clear that part up first. My accent's a bit weird now, though. But I first, where was I going with this end? Yeah, so I started lifting weights from a really young age, but I had always played rugby. So in Wales, rugby's our number one sport. So that was my sport. And then when I started lifting weights and I started getting consistent, like you said, from the age of 16, and really started seeing results, really, because at that age, the amount of testosterone levels you have naturally is insane, right? So I think I hit the sweet spot, James, started lifting at the right age and just really fell in love with it. And then when I was 19, so I was working in dead-end jobs. And to be honest, actually, a personal little insight here is I actually lost someone close to me when I was like 17. It was my stepdad. And I actually went much harder then. I had this revelation recently when I was reflecting. I was like, oh, wow, that was actually obviously very painful, but I channeled that pain into going to the gym more frequently. and I was 17 and I started seeing insane results. And obviously just for mental health as well, it was just really important for me to have that outlet at that time. So that kind of, happened for a reason, as painful as it was, and give me even more drive then, thinking, wow, I love this. But I didn't really do too well in school. Typical story, kind of didn't even make it out of college, to be honest. Sixth form, we call it in the UK. I literally got right to the end of doing my exams and then just pulled out. I just thought, I'm not going to do it, right? After 2 years of studying. So didn't make it to uni, but I always really loved fitness, right? So I was working in kind of dead end jobs, working in call centers and everything else. And I just got to a point where I'm like, no, I'm just going to pursue what I actually enjoy, what I'm passionate about. Started off then doing my fitness instructor qualification, then qualified as a PT, and never looked back then. 20 years old, started training people. I was working in the gym at the time back home. And yeah, fast forward then to the age of 26. And that's when I discovered bodybuilding then, actually competing on stage, because I'd stopped playing rugby. So I'm very competitive. I always was playing sports, like I said. And when I stopped playing rugby, I thought, well, I need something else. And that's when the men's physique came about, the men's physique category within bodybuilding. And that's, for the audience, that's when you're wearing those board shorts. Thankful at the time, James, because I had terrible legs, to be honest, at the time. So just as well, I was wearing long shorts. And yeah, I just kind of jumped on stage then, kind of on a whim. I was like, oh, okay, this new men's physique thing, it was in my area. Jumped on the stage and done really well. I got into I come second out of, I think it was like 12 people. And then I got into the British finals, which wasn't planned, which was like 6 weeks later. And that's when I got into that world then. But yeah, just long story short, in terms of being a transformation coach now and ultimately still being in this industry, I still love it. And I always say to people, it's like, it starts off as your passion, but we all know you've got to have that purpose and fulfillment. And for me, it's gone beyond passion now, actually helping people become the best version of themselves, unlock their true potential. It literally has become my purpose now. Like yourself, I still love this stuff. You know what I mean? Actually being in the position we're in, right? To be able to impact people and effectively help people change their lives is an incredible position to be in, right, bro?
I really admire you that you found that passion early on, Martin, and you've really cultivated that into your life and your lifestyle and your energy. It's really infectious. So well done on all of that. I'd like to just backtrack a little bit because it's something that is going to we're going to talk about as your journey goes along, but also something that my listeners would be interested in. Is your dietary choices from a young age? Did you grow up on sort of the standard diet? Did you have it, when you were competing at that younger age in your 20s, what diet were you doing? You may have known or noticed recently that I've had Jake Thomas, Life Like Jake, on the podcast.
He
was a competitive bodybuilder. He obviously won on the vegan diet, which is incredible for someone to do. He's full carnivore now and crushing it. I've also spoke to Scott Mislinski, who, as you know, is into building his physique as well. I know you appeared on his podcast and him being a carnivore, more animal-based, but a roundabout way of just asking you what you did dietarily during that period.
That's a great question. And to backpedal a bit, it's very similar in these westernized countries. I think USA is another animal, right, in terms of the food, industry. It's like, let's not go into that one just yet. But in the UK, I grew up the same way as everyone else, eating bloody cereal for breakfast, white bread, all that kind of stuff, eating processed food. I grew up on it, just like most people. And, to be honest, single mother, we didn't have that much money and stuff like that. So, we had to just eat, those foods because it was cheaper as well. And it served me well because I used to drink loads of milk. Looking back, I used to drink so much full fat milk. I'm sure that played a part, when I started lifting weights, because I used to drink like 2-3 pints a day. Unfortunately, I can't tolerate dairy now. I'm sure that played a part in helping me make some of those gains with the nutrients and the calories and whatnot. But yeah, I started off eating processed foods from a young age. And then my diet was terrible. Like, cut a long story short, my diet was poor. But when I say poor, when I first started lifting weights, I was eating pasta, tuna, mayonnaise. I heard Arnie say that, mayonnaise is good for building muscle, right? Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But I was eating just literally like tuna, pasta, mayonnaise all the time. We did just loads of calories when I started lifting weights. But obviously, testosterone levels are high, metabolism is through the roof naturally at that age. So it helped me actually make gains. But obviously, I was gaining a lot of body fat with it. So I was eating a lot of processed foods. And then I got to a point then, in fact, I used to kind of annoy my friends in my early 20s because I was in insane shape, like shredded, big, and I used to eat what I wanted. But then I actually started leveling that up then. When I got to about, say, 24, 25, I started just noticing, I feel better when I eat more meat and vegetables, for example, and real food. Oh, okay, I feel better when I eat these foods and I actually enjoy them as well. And I started actually gradually improving my relationship with food and eating more, I guess, single ingredient foods looking back, although I wasn't really paying too much attention to that at the time. And then I discovered bodybuilding when I was 26, and then it went all kind of downhill then. So then what happened with the bodybuilding stuff is I ended up kind of having an eating disorder, long story short. So I've talked about this on many other podcasts, but for about 2 years, even when I wasn't preparing for a show, so like off season, as we say, I was still eating garbage on the weekends because I had developed this poor relationship with food, because you're restricting, you're getting down to a really low body fat percentage, which, by the way, for the audience, is not healthy competing. If you want to do it properly and you want to get, shredded, not good for your hormones physiologically, but more importantly, psychologically, right? So I didn't really know what I was doing, James. So I had like an old school bodybuilder diet, and it was very restrictive. It was the typical chicken, broccoli, whatever. And then backtracking to what I was saying when I got into the British finals. So that's when it started going downhill. I got shredded for that comp, more shredded than I've ever been, but it was overly restrictive. I was following that bodybuilder diet plan. And then after the show, I'll never forget, I started making a list of all these foods that I wanted to eat. And that's when the kind of disorder was kicking in. All these restaurants I wanted to eat at, all these processed foods I wanted to eat. And then I just went all out on this rampage of binging. And it was from then on, that would have been like October 2013 up until about probably the end of 2014 is when I really struggled with that. And then it was a whole nother transformation process then. But I'm glad that all happened, because after that process of 2 years, started 2015, I was still competing then, by the way. That's when I really started to improve and went back to eating whole foods. But I really introduced stuff like fasting and became more and more aware of my health, because I had to, James, to be honest. I was getting like lots of gut issues and whatnot, obviously from smashing the Dominoes and a tub of Ben & Jerry's and then going straight to sleep. You know what I mean? And then it really, really kind of went to a new level then.
Really interesting, Martin. And thank you for sharing that. And, men don't talk about it enough, I don't think, the emotional side
I agree.
of eating. So you talked about sort of this gut side of things. I dealt with that completely, but mine was a little bit different in that I was bombing myself with all the vegan foods and no.
Yeah. And that's that. And we'll go into that. We can transition to that as well, because that was half of the journey with the bodybuilding, and then there's the whole another 10 years after that, which we can go into. But yeah, continue, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I had been pescatarian, vegetarian, as the listeners know, for many years, then went into full veganism, and it went really well for a while, because I was eating very clean vegan. I was eating more whole foods, plant-based. But what I found out later on was that I was bombing myself with very high oxalate foods through people that I credit with saving my life. Literally is like Sally Norton, who's the oxalate expert, and also then finding Dr. Baker. Now, for you, I know a key book for you was the Carnivore Code by Dr. Saladino, but please talk to us about those digestive issues you had and when sort of this transformation into a more animal-based way of eating comes about.
Awesome, man. So yeah, I started introducing kind of more vegetables and meats, and just eating better. And as I say, introducing things like fasting and essentially just slowly eliminating those ultra-processed foods. But it's important to note for the listeners, the approach I take with myself and with most clients is, rather than trying to restrict those foods, because those foods are designed to make us overeat, right? Long story short. So if you try and just go, I'm going to restrict all of those foods. I'm not, how many times you hear this? I'm not going to eat sugar anymore. Okay, let's be realistic here. So I was just adding in, again, I wasn't really fully aware of this. I was just adding in foods, more meat, more vegetables, those kind of things. And slowly but surely, I stopped having the desire to eat those foods. And then things started really moving forward. But moving forward then, basically, I moved to Australia, 6.5 years ago. And when I came here, at that point then, my relationship with food was much better. I was eating probably about, 85, 90% real food, but I still had some of those processed foods in there. And I was still overeating emotionally at times, to be honest, when I first got here. But going back to 2 years ago, I was the guy who could eat, bowls of broccoli and cauliflower, right? And olive oil and salt, and actually enjoy it. I'm not going to lie. I actually still, if I could eat vegetables, I enjoy vegetables. I enjoy the taste. However, my gut and my skin doesn't. My immune system doesn't for most vegetables, right? So what I noticed was, going back about 3 years ago, I think it was, I read the book, as you said, the Carnivore Code. And that was a real kind of turning point for me. That's when I really started thinking, okay, right, it's worth trying this, because it was really frustrating that I am a coach, I'm where I'm at. I look good. However, my gut and my skin issues, something's not right here. And I mentioned this on Sean Baker's podcast, but the putrid farts from, as you say, from oxalates primarily, and some of the other compounds, lectins probably as well, that you get in potatoes. So for me, potatoes are one of the worst things for my gut, unfortunately, and I really enjoyed eating them. So then I read the book and I started, increasing the amount of animal-based foods I was eating, good quality foods, more grass-fed beef, bone broth, even organ meats, and really experimenting more with that stuff and eliminating vegetables. I thought I'll try this for a week. Felt way better, kept it going, still had some fruit in there, and felt fantastic. And then fast forward to where I'm at now, and I'm thriving. And what I noticed is those gut issues subsided. My digestion was better than it's ever been. The skin issues I used to get, these really horrendous kind of, like, I used to get itchy skin. And I thought it was from the heat here in Australia. I thought, it's probably just from the heat and whatever else. But it was actually from what I was eating. And then I just started feeling better. Mental clarity, even my libido ramped up a bit. And everything really just leveled up from there. My performance in the gym, even muscle retention, I noticed was a little bit better, and never looked back. But it's really important to note as well, James, it's like there's so much variance from person to person, right, with nutrition. And because I've coached so many people, it's very complex. However, if you have an immune issues like James and I had, you got to really pay attention to the compounds that you're consuming from plants, because they have defense mechanisms in them, which essentially want to poison you, right? And some people thrive, though. If you're thriving and you're doing really well, you're getting none of these issues, you're on top form, your metabolic health is good, your sex life is good, everything is on top form, and you're eating some vegetables, then fantastic. It sounds like it might be working for you. But from what I've seen, it is actually very common for people to get issues with those plant-based foods. But not to mention, obviously, you get all of the bioavailable nutrients you need from eating things like grass-fed beef, right? Which is something that I heard Sean Baker talking about this ages ago. It was like 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. The first time I heard about carnivore was him on Joe Rogan. And I thought to myself, I should try this for 30 days, yeah? And I should have, looking back, I thought this the other day, I thought I should have just tried it back then, like 5-6 years ago. But I was like, nah, that can't be right. So it took me another like 2-3 years after that, and going through more pain with my gut and stuff, to actually implement that. But yeah, never look back, man. It's been the best thing I ever did. One of the best things I ever did, to be honest.
Love that, Martin. And for those listeners, they already know my story, and they have often heard me say this. What I really appreciate about you and listening to you is that flexibility and non-dogmatic approach, because that's similar to me. We're all unique on this journey. We're all individualized. And so our diet should be. We know what to now, especially center it around good, whole animal-based foods. But there are nuances to this. Like for myself, if you come from a highly oxalate toxic vegan background like I did, where you're storing and dumping oxalate, it makes sense. Thank you again, Sally, and Monique Addinger, who I just interviewed recently as well, that you have to keep certain oxalate foods in there so your body doesn't just dump them all at once and you feel awful. And I want to get into some more specific questions around food, if I can, Martin, with you before we move on to sort of the fitness piece, because I have some really good ones for you on the fitness side that I'm anxious to talk to you about. With your dietary shift, there's always this talk, and I know you've been asked before, but I'm interested to hear your view on the animal-based side of things versus the carnivore side of things, and fitness and training. And are carbs necessary for the bodybuilding world, in your opinion? What do you think?
Now, I'm sure you probably, I think I've heard you talk about this before, but, it's important to note that with carbohydrates, we can actually live without them. It's not an essential macronutrient. You can actually survive. And for some people, obviously, that you've had on this podcast, and yourself and me, thrive without carbohydrates and actually do better for some people. But again, everyone is different. But, protein and fats, you would literally die without. In fact, you would get nasty nutrient deficiencies. And it just would not be pleasant how you died as well, right? If you start, eliminating essential fatty acids and amino acids, in other words, protein, from your diet. So when it comes to performance and carbohydrates, most people, you don't need carbohydrates to perform really well, depending on the type of training you're doing. Obviously, if you're an ultra marathon runner, you're doing all these endurance events, probably some carbohydrates are going to do you good. But even then, some people do okay without. However, you're most likely going to need to, to bump up your glycogen levels and throw some carbs in there. And if you're doing any really, like if you're an athlete and you're doing really intense power movements, for example, some carbohydrates could be beneficial. But it really depends on the person. So you don't really need, for the most part, carbohydrates to perform well in the gym and to actually get good results, right? Because your body is going to utilize fat primarily as an energy source anyway. And, you know, you got to understand that with the body as well, you've got like tens of thousands of calories of fat stored. Even someone lean like me, I've got tens of thousands of calories of fat and just calories in general stored in my body in case I was to get dumped on a desert island, right, with no food to keep me alive for a long time. So you know, normally would do well without carbohydrates. However, as I say, I know some people, like I notice with females from all the people I've coached, generally sometimes when it comes to strength training and actually hitting PBs in the gym and stuff like that, they do better with carbohydrates. But the thing with carbohydrates is we get a big psychological attachment to carbohydrates. So what I notice is people tell themselves a story, and I was doing this. By the way, for the listeners, all the stuff I'm talking about here, right? I've actually experienced all of this myself. So it's not just from clients I've coached. I've actually been through this stuff I'm talking about. And I'm sure James can relate to this as well. But we tell ourselves a story like I need carbohydrates, or I need to have that bit of sugar before training, or, you know, I'm not going to lift as heavy. And then we tell ourselves our story. So we never try, or at least try for long enough, for like at least like a week or two of maybe just not having or having lower carbohydrates and trying to lift heavy weights or whatever kind of training you're doing without that to see how you go. And most of the time you're totally fine and, you know, you're going to do really well. So, but when it comes to physique and body composition, if we throw this one in there with carbohydrates, believe it or not, carbohydrates and fat, you know, as far as research shows. Now, this is kind of debatable because there's new research coming out, but they don't really make any difference to body composition. So one research shows when protein is equated for, right? So, for example, they did studies, right? And they did one group eating keto, right? Which is super high fat, moderate protein. The other group were having relatively high carbs and moderate protein. So, sorry, moderate protein and really high fat, that's keto, right? And then they were doing moderate protein and high carbs, the other group. And what they found was initially the keto group lost more fat. Can't think what it might have only been a 12-week study, but the keto group lost more fat. But what they looked at is they didn't actually equate for the exact amount of so it was they didn't they put the calories in there, so they equated the calories, but they didn't equate for the exact amount of protein each group was having. And then what they found was, you know, that was because the keto group were actually having more protein, and protein has a high thermic effect on the body, which makes your body basically burn more calories by itself. So cut a long story short, if you're hitting high protein or adequate protein and calories, obviously we can't argue with the law of thermodynamics, right? You know, energy in, calories out, right? I don't agree with move more and eat less thing for weight loss because it's really not that simple. But that's the two most important things when it comes to body composition. That being said, with fats and carbohydrates, just going back to what we were talking about, and gut health and how you feel when you eat certain types of fats, when you eat certain types of carbohydrates, everyone is very different. So it's going to be personal preference in terms of how you feel, how you perform. And that's why you've really got to be in tune with your body and pay attention to things like gut health and how you feel when you eat certain foods. Because most people, let's be honest, the number one value they attach to food is how it tastes. And they haven't put the work in for long enough to be aware of what specific foods do to you and how they make you feel, how they make you perform, gut health, energy, all those kind of things. So personal preference really with fats and carbs. When we're talking about body composition, specifically, high protein and calories when you have an adequate protein and calories are equated for, they're the two most important things. But one more little thing here, and this is very, very important, right? This is based on research. However, when you look at human behavior and all the people I've coached, right? When you eat carbohydrates, it depends, and not all carbs are treated equally, right? There's different types of simple sugars, and I won't go too much into that conversation. However, regardless of that, carbohydrates will spike your blood sugar levels and they will make you want to eat more, right? So what I see, and I've coached a lot of people, and I've been through this journey myself, is when you're eating carbohydrates, like for breakfast or with every meal or whatever, is spiking your blood sugar level. And what it does is it tricks you into thinking you're hungry normally a few hours later because your blood sugar levels go up and then back down again. Oh, I need to eat again. However, when you eat more protein and fats and less carbohydrates, what you'll notice, if you're doing it properly and you have an adequate protein and you're having, animal-based food, you're having, your ruminant meat, for example, beef, the essential fats that you get from beef, for example, or, bison, whatever, you're having your eggs, for example, and you're having, good fats, whatever, you can throw in some added fats, whether that be ghee oil or tallow or whatever, you're going to notice that you actually feel more satiated because you're not spiking your blood sugar levels as much. And protein and fats are the more satiating macronutrients, whereas carbohydrates are the lowest satiating macronutrients. So there was a lot there, my man, right? But as you know, there's a lot of context, right, when it comes to carbohydrates and macros.
It sure is, Martin. And I love it. I love talking about this stuff. And before we leave the food subject and go into the fitness, there's a couple of other things I want to say. I listened to you, and one of the things you said that really impacted me was your relationship with food says more about the relationship you have with yourself. And it's so true, right? And you mentioned you were talking about fat to protein and carbohydrates and all this stuff. And one of the other things you talk about is that when you're dealing with your clients, and as I did early on in my journey into adding animal foods back into my diet, I severely undershot my protein requirements because the food is so satiating. And I'm sure you still find that, right? Where your clients they think they're eating a lot of protein, but when you start calculating it out, they're really not. I'm sure that's the case, right?
100%, man. You hit the nail on the head.
So what are you finding now in terms of what do you tell people to aim for on a macronutrient basis, like protein? Do you go for the gram and a half per pound of body weight? I'm doing the way I use the metrics here, but what do you shoot for as a trainer and a coach?
Yeah. So first of all, it depends on where the individual is at. And obviously I've got to meet them where they're at, right? So for example, to be honest, the people that I work with, they're generally at a decent level, to be fair. So they're already doing okay with protein. Like a lot of the people that I work with are already at a decent level. They want to get to the next level. However, I do work with some general pop as well. And if you look at the general population, most people are under eating protein, or they're not having optimal protein, right? Now, basically, what I'll throw in, for example, for some people is, let's say they're grossly under eating. Let's say it's a woman, she weighs 120 pounds, right? And she's averaging 50 grams of protein a day or 60 grams of protein. This does happen, right? I'm not going to say straight away, okay, we're going to go for optimal, because what's optimal on paper is not going to be sustainable for some people. Asking someone to double their protein. Like if I said to that same woman, for example, I want you to hit optimal amounts of 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That's 120 grams from 50 grams. She's not going to stick to that forever. You're raising the bar too high for the most part, right? For most people. So I'll say something simple like, okay, let's have a look at what you're eating. And a common thing is, for the average person, they're just not having enough protein for breakfast, right? This is a common thing. Get up in the morning, I'll have my oatmeal or whatever, right? And people say, I eat healthy. I eat really healthy. And they're having like oatmeal, right? Which is okay. It's better than garbage, right? Okay, it's, whatever, right? I can think of worse things to eat. However, it's not necessarily healthy. You're not getting much protein in. And going back to what we were saying, you're going to be hungry a few hours later. And just simply getting people to try and eat what they would eat for dinner, if I'm talking to the average person, for breakfast, right? Okay, what would you? Okay, well, how about we have some of the leftover ground beef that you had from the night before, or beef mince, as we say here in Australia, and you add that with your eggs in the morning, right? What you had for dinner, let's make extra and let's have that in the morning, or your beef patties or whatever it is. It could even just be some chicken, whatever. Let's have that with your eggs in the morning and your little bit of avocado or whatever you're having. And again, going back to what we were saying then, that's protein, that's fats, that's lots of essential nutrients you need, higher protein. And then they go, oh, wow, what I noticed was I wasn't actually hungry. Even when I got to lunch, I didn't feel that hungry. I just knew I had to eat. So I was satiated for like a good kind of 4 hours or whatever, as opposed to, or maybe even 5 hours, as opposed to their normal thing of 2 hours later, oh, I want a snack. I get this question sometimes, what would you recommend for good snacks? And, I'll give recommendations and stuff like that, but I'm always looking at something is normally broke if you want a snack. It's normally emotional eating. Number one, you're snacking because you're bored or you're tired or whatever it is, or you're not having complete meals. So when you start having like a simple thing there, like dinner for breakfast, naturally you're having more protein and you're getting more nutrients, and generally you start to feel better. And so that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, is like the sustainability thing and an example for general population. Now, for people who come to me and they're already eating decent amount of protein, optimal, I'm going to say for someone who wants to really level up their physique, they want to build some muscle, they might even want to lose some fat as well. And by the way, for some people listening, that is what happens with most of my clients who join within that first 90 days, because my program, like the minimum sign up is 90 days. They tend to lose fat and build muscle for a 2 to 3 month period, give or take, depending on the reservoir of fat they've got, just from simply having optimal protein. And when I say optimal, to build muscle and maybe simultaneously lose some fat for a period of time, optimal for me, I'm going to say like 1.25 grams per pound of body weight. So a little bit more than a gram per pound of body weight. And I don't go on, research will show you should do it on lean body mass, but it just gets complicated. And I feel like, having more protein is never, we could talk about, gluconeogenesis and stuff like that when people have too much protein and it turns into, I get this question sometimes, but it really is splitting hairs. I don't know anyone that I've coached out of all the people and myself. Oh, you've had too much protein. We've got a problem here. No, what normally happens, providing their digestion is okay, that can sometimes be an issue, but that's very rare. They tend to get leaner because their body's working harder. Metabolism is working harder to burn calories, to digest the food. So it's burning more calories. They tend to feel better because they're eating more meat and more animal-based foods. So they're getting more nourishment into their body and they're feeling more satiated. And they tend to build muscle and lose fat better as well. So yeah, I would say that's the optimal amount. I'd say, because we do kilograms here though, right? So I'm trying to do in America. Yeah. So 1.25 grams of protein per pound of body weight, I would say is optimal for most. But again, if it's the average person, if you can get a gram per pound of body weight, then you're smashing it. You're winning.
Last question, sort of food related, and we've kind of nicely segued in that little section there into more the training side, which I'm going to get to in a second. But this is a difficult question given what we've just talked about and that everything is so nuanced and it's individualized. And I completely agree with you because I get this question a ton, and I'm going to ask this question to you because I know a listener would go, but James, you didn't ask that question. What does your day of eating look like currently, Martin? I get it all the time because they're like, well, James, I want to look like you now. I'm where you were and I want to get to where you are. But for you now, what does a day of eating look like on sort of this animal-based diet that you're doing?
I love this question, brother, right? Literally, it's funny because 5 minutes before the podcast, I was in the elevator and a guy asked me, what are you doing on the, I don't know how he knows, to be honest. He must have seen me carrying beef back from the butchers or something, right? He's like, how's the beef mince going? How much do you eat a day? You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, 1.5 kilos of beef a day on average, or maybe 1.3 kilos of beef a day. And he's like, oh, wow. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I understand why people ask these questions, but I'm just going to say it how it is. It's pointless. It's not pointless. That's a bit harsh, right? It's good to know what someone is, but it doesn't apply to you. Like just everything we're talking about here, what James is and what I eat in a day. I know people are curious and they want to see this, but why? It's almost like a lot of people, they want the answer, right? And I get it. Like humans, we seek the path of least resistance, right? I get it. I want to know what he eats and I want to get the results he's getting. And let's go. If it was that simple, right? Everyone would be, or that easy, should I say, everyone would be walking around with, 6-pack abs. We know that's not the case, right? So for me, but it is good to share this. And I don't know about yourself, but I'm like, I do share sometimes while eating a day and stuff, but most of the time I just don't. Because I'm like, this is not going to work. Like most people can't eat half this amount of meat in a day, let alone in one meal. You know what I'm saying? So what I'll eat in a day, and now this is a really good question, because what I've done is this year is actually the first year where I've gone strict carnivore for a few months. So March and last month, I did a strict carnivore month where I normally eat meat and some fruit and a little bit of dark chocolate as well. I love my dark chocolate. Basically, what I'll normally eat is I'll give you an example of a strict carnivore month first, which is not ordinary for me. This is not what I'll eat, 85% of the year. But last month, I actually tried for the first time just doing the lion thing, right? Where I was just eating meat and salt for about 2 weeks of September. And the other 2 weeks, I was eating primarily meat and eggs and some organ meat. So I'm throwing in some bone broth. And what I noticed was I felt a lot better energy-wise and everything else. And gut health as well was even a little bit better, although that's pretty good most of the time. My performance was just as good, to be honest, even though I was in a calorie deficit, because me just eating meat and salt, I need a lot of calories just to maintain my weight. So I was in a calorie deficit. I felt better. But then what I did notice is towards the end of September, from eating just meat and salt, I don't think this is from the food. This is just probably from being in a calorie deficit, most likely. However, it could have been that maybe some of the nutrients I was getting from eggs and stuff like that, right? Because let's be honest, the egg yolk is the perfect multivitamin, choline, those kind of things. I was eating some beef liver as well, but probably could have eaten more of that because, as I say, I was just eating mainly red meat and salt. So basically, I started noticing, and going back to the libido thing, now I've never noticed this before. When I said about the gut health thing, I basically didn't have low libido. It just went to a new level, a whole new level, which I was like, wow, this is crazy. I haven't had this since I was like 17. But what I noticed was, for the first time I can recall, is actually my libido started dropping towards the end of September last year. And it wasn't something that, for example, like in the bedroom and stuff like that, without going into detail, once called upon, I was good. But normally my drive is crazy, right? You can like, my drive is crazy. You just know, as a guy, you just know, don't you? When your test levels are up, like, what I'm saying, I won't go to the detail here. You just know, right? But I noticed, wow, that drive is not the same. And my libido has definitely dropped. So that could have just been because I was in a calorie deficit or whatever. But all in all, I felt better other than noticing that. And then my energy started dropping a bit. But again, I was in a calorie deficit. But ordinarily, like this, I'm going to switch back to doing that as well. Just kind of doing meat and salt and one meal a day. I'm going to just do that now, probably a few times a week anyway, because I think it's not just how I feel. I think it's a good behavioral thing as well, to detach from all the other foods and just get what you need. Just get your meat and salt, have it in one meal. And obviously fasting benefits, we could talk about that, but it's more of a psychological thing as well, and a discipline thing. I think being able to apply that and abstain from anything in life, that could be anything. It could be food, it could be sex, it could be anything, right? Alcohol even, is actually a really good practice to detach from things, right? It helps you grow and it helps you actually learn more about yourself. But yeah, long story short, like now, for example, what I'm eating, so I'm eating, brought some fruit in and stuff like that. So ordinarily I'll have 5 days a week. On average, I'll have just one meal a day. And in that one meal, I'll eat probably on average about 1.3 kilos of beef mince. Or sometimes I'll have like a kilo of beef mince and maybe like, 300 grams of beef liver. And I'll have egg yolks as well. Egg whites tend to mess my gut up. So I just have egg yolks, and that's where all the nutrients are anyway. And I get more than enough protein, as you know, so I don't really need the whites. So I'll have generally probably about, 8 egg yolks, maybe 1.3 kilos of beef mince. And then now, because I'm eating my normal stuff again now this week, I've been having some coconut yogurts. It's like the Koyo organic coconut yogurt, and I'll have some berries with that, maybe some frozen banana with that as well. And probably about, twice this week, or twice in a week now, I'll have like a bit of dark chocolate. But what I'll do again now is I'll just go back to having, like next week, I'll just go back to having, I felt like I needed a week. I know my body, and I felt like I needed a week of having just more food and more calories. Right. And bringing in, so the coconut yogurt is an easy way for me to get my calories in, because it's like, 600 calories in a bowl, you know what I'm saying? And just the coconut yogurt. And I have noticed I feel a bit better in the gym. My sleep's a bit better, and my readiness score is better because I track using the Aura. My libido is way back up again. So I think I just needed more calories, and I know my body. But long story short, that's what I'll eat in a day at the moment. I'll have like coconut yogurt, some berries after I've eaten that one meal of beef mince. I've been having some avocado this week as well. But I would say over the space of like a month now, there'll be about, I reckon at least, say 10 days, 7 to 10 days minimum in a month, where I'll literally just have the one meal, 1.5 kilos of red meat and salt. And then for the other half of the month, then I'll probably have meat, eggs, fruit, some avocado, maybe some dark chocolate. No, definitely some dark chocolate, at least 85%. And some of that coconut yogurt. And that's pretty much how I'm going to cycle it right now.
It's so true. Like I'm doing more of an intuitive eating thing. So people ask me all the time, James, do you weigh out? Do you calculate how much you feel? I'm like, no, I just eat till I'm full, and then I stop. And then I naturally kind of fast, because I try and get my eating window during the day down. And then I naturally, well, not naturally, I made a conscious choice like you to have some regular milk yogurt and some berries in the evening. But that is a multi-pronged approach for me to have a little bit of carbs before bed to help my sleep, and also to get some low oxalate food in there to help with my oxalate dumping. So, and again, as you say, so many people are coming at this from different areas, so it's going to be unique to everyone. Martin, what I'd like to talk about next is we go into the sort of fitness side, and we sort of wind down a little bit. You have a really great way of approaching this thought pattern on people, and you talk about the 3 rocks that they have to move. Please tell our listeners what those 3 big rocks are, and what your suggestions are for that, and improving them if you can.
I'll tell you what, I'll reverse and talk about what the pebbles are first, right? So you got the big rocks, and then you got the pebbles. Pebbles being, supplements that you take. Even fasting. Fasting's a tool you can utilize, but that shouldn't be the main focus. I would say that's a pebble for most people, right? What other things we got? For example, what else would not really move the needle forward? It's like, maybe little nuances with your training. Oh, I might start using some bands or trying this new, exercise routine, right? That's kind of a pebble. Follow a proper training program and do the fundamental movements, right? Which we'll touch on. The big rocks, the three. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to broaden this a bit now, right? Because I think it's important for people to understand all of those big rocks. Now, the three big rocks, right, I would say, though, if we take the other two out, is the training, nutrition, and sleep, right? They're the three biggest rocks, I would say. But then we've got to look at, environment as well and movement. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify it for the sake of this conversation. Right? I'm going to go with six big rocks. Right? I'm going to go with training, nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress, right? Now, sleep and stress, I would say all in all, are actually the two most important things. Because if one of those is out of whack, that is going to dictate all the other things, right? Your ability to get results in the gym, your decision-making with food. If you're more stressed and you're not managing that, guess what? That's probably going to have a negative impact on your sleep. And then you got that vicious cycle, right? So even one night of poor sleep, of sleep deprivation, right? That can change a lot. It can completely change your hormone profile. Research shows people who are sleep deprived eat 44% more calories. So it's a lot, right? It all adds up. So let's talk about sleep first, right? Because sleep is the most important thing, right? That's the foundation. The thing that I think people overlook is the actual discipline of having routine and some sort of ritual in the nighttime. Now, I would argue this is the hardest thing. I would say this is the hardest thing. This is something that I still struggle with clients. And this is the last thing for me to optimize stupidly. If I could go back 15 years, 10 years, I would have optimized this sleep thing a long time ago, right? This is literally, I'm talking 2 years ago is when I really, maybe 2.5 years ago, when I really started dialing in this sleep routine and everything else and wearing the blue light blockers. I've been wearing them for a long time. But coming away from blue light, for example, in the nighttime and being disciplined and it's the hardest thing, right? But I'm sure you can relate to this. Closing that laptop or putting that phone down, having routine, wearing your blue light blockers, great if you can do that. And that's a simple trick. I think that's the easiest win, right? Because all you got to do is put the bloody things on, right? You haven't got to do anything. Just put them on 3-4 hours before bed. That's going to help. But putting that phone down at least ideally 90 minutes before bed. I've got those salt lamps, which I put on because red light is actually good for sleep. Whereas, if you've got the right kind of brightness, I've got those red salt lamps I put on from about, 7 p.m., 2-3 hours before bed, dim the lights down or use candlelight and just come away from the phone. Put that phone down at least 90 minutes before bed. Listen to a podcast. By all means, I always say to clients, it doesn't mean you have to go to bed, just sit there, for 90 minutes bored out your brains. You can listen to a podcast, you can read a book, all those kind of things, right? So having some sort of sleep routine and getting your usual, I don't want to give like hours because everyone is different. Some people do really, really well with 6.5 hours sleep. Other people need 8 to 9 hours. You got to find the sweet spot for yourself. But that and the regularity, going to bed at roughly the same time, generally you're going to start waking up at roughly the same time if you're really strict with that nighttime routine. And I would say most of the things will follow. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole with sleep because we'll be here all day. But stress as well. I always say when it comes to stress, I think the most important thing people need to have the ability to do is to be able to change their state. So when you're in a state of overwhelm, it could be loneliness. It could just be you're super stressed out with work or whatever. Having the ability to change your state without using food, without bad habits creeping back in, using alcohol as a coping mechanism, having healthy coping mechanisms in place, which are going to change your emotional state, is fundamental for your stress management. So, for example, simple things like, if you've got the luxury to going for a walk when you're super stressed, a quick walk to change your state, change your environment. I've got the luxury of working from home, right? So cold shower. I'll get my rubber resistance bands out. This is what I do with clients. I'll go, right, okay, great. Let's do another band session because our band sessions are only like 10 minutes long. And they just get a pump on, get their heart rate up, boom, change their state. It can be anything. The ability to change your state, whether that's deep breathing, it looks different for everyone. But having that ability to get yourself out of that state is very powerful. It really builds resilience, really helps with stress management. But again, that's a whole nother conversation with stress. But they're the two things that come to mind, sleep and stress. And then obviously, nutrition, then we've got training and we've got, movement as well. And what was the other one? Then we've so sleep, stress, training, movement, and nutrition. So that's like 5 actually, isn't it? Yeah. So, and obviously with nutrition, then I would say the fundamentals then, because I want to talk about the big rocks, but I want to talk about the fundamentals for each one based on all the people I've coached and my journey. With nutrition, it's going to be the number one thing is it always circles around to the same thing with nutrition, right? Regardless of whether we're talking about carnivore, whatever we're talking about, avoid ultra processed foods, right? And when I say avoid them, going back to what I said earlier, unfortunately, it's not that simple because those foods hijack your brain. They literally hijack your brain and take over, right? So they hijack the signals to tell you when you're actually really hungry. And I used to say 80%, but I'm going to say that's bullshit. I'm going to say you need to be eating at least 90% whole foods. From what I've seen, at least 90%, right? So when I say whole foods, I think a simple way to explain this is single ingredient foods, beef, eggs, avocado, beef liver, berries, right? Single ingredient foods. Because ultra-processed foods, you're always going to be fighting a losing battle. Those foods are designed to make us overeat, specifically by 508 calories a day. There was a cross study done, which I always talk about, but it was a very fascinating study. 500 more calories a day, the group that had unlimited access to ultra-processed foods versus the whole food group, and they crossed the groups over. And the same things happened because of the individual variants. They crossed them over. The same thing happened. That's like on average about a pound of fat a week you would gain, right, from eating ultra processed. So it just goes to show. But that and what goes hand in hand with that is what we were saying: protein. Protein's the number one thing, right? And even Andrew Huberman will say this, right? He says the most important thing with nutrition is to have good quality protein. Not all protein is treated equally. Plant-based protein, terrible bioavailability and quality in comparison to meat and animal-based foods, right? So eating meat, right, and good quality protein sources, things like leucine, really, really important. The most important amino acid, really. Foods like beef, chicken, all those kind of things, they're high in leucine, even eggs, and the right balance of amino acids. So they're the kind of two most important things in nutrition without going down into that rabbit hole, and then training as well.
Let's talk about the training side then, Martin, because one of the best tips that I have implemented recently was from you and listening to you on a podcast. And that is so many people are not doing the movements correctly when they train. They need to slow down. I was one of these guys. I was boom, 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 and it's because my time is very precious to me in the mornings. That's when I get my exercise in, because then I have to start my day job. But the moment that I start to slow the movement down, as you suggest, is when I start to notice the biggest difference. So talk to us about that and some of the big things you notice that people are doing incorrectly that they can improve upon on the training side, if you wouldn't mind.
I like that you started with that. And when it comes to training and strength training, definitely that's the most underrated tool. Slow tempo training. I said this before, I'll say it again. Like, how many times you look around the gym? I don't know. Do you train in the gym or do you train at home?
I actually have a small home gym that I have, but I'm going to be joining a gym shortly. But when COVID and lockdown happened, I ended up buying a lot of equipment, and I've just kind of tossed around a lot of free weights and dumbbells that I bought in a bench, and I can do those things, and body weight stuff as well.
So when you look around the gym, just for the listeners, look around. How many people do you see doing slow tempo training? Virtually no one. I never see anyone doing it, right? Number one, it's painful, right? Very, very painful. Okay, two, that's the kind of, I'm going to say excuse for both of us, right, mate? Because that's the excuse I make as well. Because it's true though, like we have limited time. We want to go to the gym. We want to get it done in a certain time, right? And it takes longer. When you're doing slow tempo reps, especially if you're doing full body, right? It takes forever doing slow tempo reps, right? If you're doing full body, but it takes longer. Anyway, so that is if you can implement that one thing, ladies and gents, it really depends on what level you're at. But there's so much value to that because number one, you're actually forced to focus on technique more, right? I'm sure you've noticed this, right, James? When you slow down your reps, you're forced to really focus on technique more. You feel more tension in the muscles. It's more painful and you can't go as heavy. So you have to take the weight down and really focus on that mind-muscle connection. So that's because we always talk about progressive overload. So just for the listeners, progressive overload is paramount, right? This has been proven in research. You can't deny it. You have to add more volume one way or another, week on week, to the body in each exercise for you to build muscle. And essentially you have to overload the body to actually build muscle and get that response that you want, and metabolic stress is another thing as well, which is normally triggered by doing heavier weights if you're doing a heavier weight with a lower rep range. So you're doing, say, anywhere between 2 to 6 reps or whatever, and you're looking to get stronger and lift heavy weights, don't go slow on those reps. I mean, you could slow it down a bit just to practice form on like the first week, But obviously, if you're focusing on getting heavier, that's not going to be the goal. The goal is to lift heavier. And with that, that's called metabolic stress. So that's another way to kind of overload the body and build muscle, elicit change. But mechanical stress is when you're, like, for example, slowing the reps down or just simply applying more tension to the muscles. So that's really underrated, and that's a great way to overload the body. And another simple trick you can throw in there, right? A curveball, which I use and I still use with clients, is simply, if they're doing a specific training phase where they're doing like kind of anywhere between like 8 to 10 reps or even up to 12 reps, 8 to 12 rep range, then I'll get them to slow down the last 3 reps. And what I might do, let's say they're doing a 4-week phase, what I'll get them to do is say on the last 2 weeks, to add volume, don't add any more weight, keep the weight the same, don't do anything different. See if you can aim for the same reps. Just slow down the last 3 reps on every single set, especially the negative portion. So remember, you're building muscle and doing the damage and getting the results primarily from the lowering portion of each rep, or the negative portion or eccentric portion of the rep, right? So just for everyone listening, the lowering portion is, for example, when you're doing a squat, on the way down as you're sitting into the squat, that is when you're really doing the damage and actually, tearing your muscle fibers, whatever you want to say, and basically working the muscles and getting that response that you want. So if you can keep that like on the last 3 reps of every set, I say to clients, or just in general, they'll do this on an 8 to 10 rep range, 3 to 4 second negative, ideally 4 seconds. If you can do a 4-second negative, right? Actually go with 3 seconds, right? A 3-second negative on a squat, for example, when you're lowering down, or as you're lowering the dumbbells down to your shoulders on a shoulder press, or as you're straightening your arms out on a pull-up or on a cable row. So the lowering portion of each rep, keep that 3 seconds, pause at the bottom of each rep, and then, perform the rep a bit quicker. Watch what happens. I mean, the results you get, you have to take the weight down as well. But all in all, I would say people really need to focus on that frequency element as well. I always talk about this, but this is why I would say if I'm talking to the average person, 80-90% of people, they're going to get better results from training the full body. Like, say, training the full body like 3 times per week for like 1 hour or whatever. And research shows, for example, if you were to do legs once a week, let's say you spend 1 hour doing legs, for example, on a Monday. If you were to spread that volume over Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so instead of doing an hour on legs, you did 20 minutes Monday, perhaps as part of a full body workout. You did 20 minutes on a Monday, 20 Wednesday, 20 Friday, for example. You're doing the same amount of work, but you're spreading it over 3 sessions. You're actually going to get better results, and you're going to recover quicker, right? So you're going to get better results because, remember, the muscle building signal will die after 48 hours, 72 hours max, but I'm just going to say 48 hours. That's when the muscle building signal will die. It kind of hits its peak anywhere between kind of like 10 to 24 hours after training. That muscle building signal kind of peaks, and then it starts dipping. Let's just say after about 24 hours until it's just dead after about 48 hours to 72 hours max. So that's why, 2 days later or 3 days later, you want to hit that body part again if you want to maximize results. And also, when we look at the behavioral thing as well, the average person is simply not going to train 5 to 6 times per week for the rest of their life. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to be consistent. That's just the average person. So if you look at the behavioral aspect as well, training 3 times per week forever, consistently, on average, right? Most people are going to be able to sustain that as well. So they're the kind of most important things. Yeah. But number one is technique, 100%. Time and attention, slowing the reps down and focusing on technique is really underrated. Number 2 is spreading that volume out. And you have to hit every body part, ideally 2 to 3 times per week. And if you have lagging body parts, let's say you struggle with your legs, or you struggle with your chest, guys, or whatever, that body part you want to hit even more frequently. And that's where, perhaps, doing an extra session on that body part for simply 20 to 30 minutes, not intense, just literally moderate intensity, an extra session in the gym for that body part will actually bring that body part up more and help you make progress with that. But the other thing, the big one then, is intensity. I think intensity is the most abused variable when it comes to training, James, because people just want to train hard. And it's, it's kind of hard to train hard, I guess, but it's actually quite easy for most people just to turn up, train hard, and get results. Doesn't work like that. You got to train smart. It's like anything, right? You got to, it's a cheesy kind of cliche thing. You got to do things the smart way. Doing things hard doesn't get you results long term. At some point, you have to throw in that smart piece. So people abuse intensity. They kind of train. A lot of people they train too hard, But either A, they train really hard, they go all out, and they've got the all or nothing mentality, and they're not consistent. So they might do 4 weeks and then have a week or two off, and then 4 weeks really intense, a week or two off. The person who just chips away and they're smart, they train smart, they got a proper training program, they're doing what works for their body, and they're doing that consistently week in, week out, is going to by far surpass that person, like, all day, that person. So training hard is not always the answer. Yes, you got to have a little bit of hard work in there, but I would say most of the time, people need to train at kind of, on average, like a moderate intensity, stopping, I would say on average 2 reps short of failure. That's one more thing is I'll throw in there as well in relation to intensity. Most people always want to train to failure, get every last rep. And number one, you're going to likely compromise form. And number two, research shows clearly that actually stopping short of failure, roughly 1 to 2 reps short of losing perfect form, is actually what gets better results. And there's a place to train for failure. For example, my clients on average, like, it depends on the client, but they'll do about maybe, 25% of the year, they'll be training to failure. For the other 75% of the year, they'll be stopping 2 reps short of failure, right? So there's those kind of things that people need to be aware of. But I think that just circles back to technique, smart, training the body parts more frequently, and not abusing intensity, to summarize.
Tons and tons of nuggets in this episode. I love it, Martin. This is so great. And as I said earlier, going to have you back on, my man, because there's so many things I want to dig into with you. And I'm also looking forward to being on your podcast as well, coming up soon. With that being said, Martin, where can my listeners come and connect with you online? Where can they find you?
Hey, dude, I'm really, really looking forward to interviewing you first and foremost. I'm looking forward to getting that arranged. Audience can find me mainly on Instagram as my main kind of platform. So that's just at Martin Silva Fitness. Got my link in the bio there with everything else linked to it. However, I do want to plug the podcast one more time. Optimize Your Body. I think the audience are going to get an absolute ton of value from it. Had some of the big names on recently, and I just had Dr. Kiltz on yesterday. That was awesome. And I also had, bloody hell, like a few big names recently. I'm forgetting all the names now. Dr. Sean O'Mara I had on recently as well. Dr. Ted Knight. There's just been some great episodes lately. So definitely check that out. And then, my YouTube channel as well is Martin Silva Fitness. Got some great stuff on there as well. But again, everything's linked on my Instagram.
And I'll get those all in the show notes for everyone. Thank you again, my man. Martin Silva, this has been an absolute honor and a privilege chatting with you, my friend. So thank you for taking the time out. And I look forward to chatting again with you really soon, my brother.
My pleasure, my man. Thanks again for having me on, James.
Thank you, sir. Take care now. And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to Equip Foods, Carnivore Snacks, and the Carnivore Bar. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. Until the next time, be well.